Welcome to the channel, and in this video I'll be going over my collection of the MVD Rewind Collection. It's one of my favorite lines to collect, and it's got a wide variety of films, so let's get into the video. First up is Action USA, a movie that was written and directed by Jon Stewart, not the Daily Show host or the Green Lantern. He was a stuntman, and it's easy to tell within the first 10 minutes because it opens up with a car chase that leads to a helicopter scene where a dude is hanging outside the helicopter as it flies around the city, which then leads to another car chase that ends with a car jumping over a bus and the pursuing car just blowing up. This movie has so many nonsensical explosions and it's just amazing. The movie stars Gregory Scott Cummins, who, for any fans of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, he plays Mac's dad. I love that show, so that makes this an automatic 5-star movie for me. Vinegar Syndrome originally released this, and I missed out on that. Luckily, MVD put it back out, and it's a hidden gem for sure, because I don't know if I would have discovered this film if not for these labels. This Blu-ray also comes with a pretty good interview with the director, and this movie is worth checking out for anyone who likes action B-movies. Next up is a Van Damme classic. Double Impact has Van Damme playing twin brothers who are separated at an early age, but reunite years later to avenge their parents. Van Damme co-wrote the script with Sheldon Lettich, and this was their third collaboration. Sheldon wrote Bloodsport, and then went on to write and direct Lionheart. Van Damme wanted to make this movie to show off his range as an actor, and he actually does a good job at making these brothers distinctly different. The Blu-ray comes with a 2-part making-of documentary, and it's nearly 2 hours long. And I don't know why they split it up into 2 separate parts, but it's still just super informative, and they got Van Damme to be a part of it. I hope MVD gets to release more Van Damme movies because they've done such a great job with the 2 films of his that they put out. Next up is Drive, and not the Ryan Gosling movie, nor is it based on the book that inspired that same Gosling film. It stars Mark Dacascos as a special agent who gets a device installed in his chest that makes him superhuman, but when the government wants to use his newfound abilities for nefarious reasons, he then leaves Hong Kong for America. Then the chase is on and action ensues. Mark Dacascos is a badass in this film, and the hand-to-hand combat is the best part of this movie. The fight choreography is very well done, and director Steve Wang did a great job at shooting those scenes. Brittany Murphy has a small role in the movie. I also watched a movie called Freeway recently, and she has a small role in that too, and she was just such a likable actress. Tracy Walters also appears in this movie, a character actor I recently talked about in my Repo Man video. This also gets a recommendation for any fans of action B movies. Next is Ghoulies, and I originally thought this movie was just a cash-in on the success of Gremlins, but this movie was already in production at the same time as Gremlins, so much so that Warner Brothers sued to have them change the similar sounding name, but ended up losing that case. That poster is pretty iconic, and Charlie Band talks about it in a new interview for this release that they came up with the idea for the poster after the movie was already shot, and they knew people would be disappointed if they didn't get to see a ghoulie pop out of the toilet. So they shot that scene after the fact. The Ghoulies were created by John Carl Buechler, one of my favorite makeup effects artists. He was a frequent collaborator with Charlie Band, and Charlie would give Buechler his big break as a director. MVD also put this out on 4K, along with the sequel. Speaking of the sequel, Ghoulies 2, in my opinion, is a much better film. The Ghoulies are set loose in a carnival, and it's just a lot of fun. There's not a whole lot of build-up and exposition to get to the mayhem this time around. The Ghoulies themselves have a bit more personality, and they expand upon the lore like any good sequel should do. John Carl Buechler came back to do the creature effects. MVD originally only put this out on Blu-ray, but they have since put it out on 4K. The series would continue on for a couple more films that are still just MIA on Blu-ray. I've heard good things about Ghoulies 3, Ghoulies Go to College, but that might be owned by Lionsgate, so if anything, that may be a part of the Bestron video line. Next up is a far departure from Little Rubber Monsters Wreaking Havoc. Guncrazy is a Bonnie and Clyde love story. It's a solid indie movie with great lead performances by Drew Barrymore and James LeGros. This was the directorial debut of Tamara Davis, who previously made music videos for bands like Depeche Mode, The Smiths, Beastie Boys, and Sonic Youth. She would go on to direct a couple of my favorite comedies like Billy Madison and Half-Baked. She would also direct the Britney Spears classic, Crossroads. There's a great interview on this Blu-ray with her, and she goes over her entire career. She mainly directs TV shows now, but her work in the 90s is pretty impeccable, and I think she should get more recognition. Next up is House on Sorority Row. This was a blind buy for me. I had seen the remake when that came out, so when this got announced, I was excited to finally check this movie out, and it's a really solid 80s slasher. The basic premise is similar to the remake, but that's where the similarities end. A group of sorority sisters play a prank on someone, and that prank goes horribly wrong, and now they're paying the price for it. I highly recommend any horror fan to watch this movie. I even think Tarantino has praised this movie, if that means anything to you. This Blu-ray ports over all the previous bonus features from a DVD back in the day. The director was interviewed, and it was cool to learn that he got his start working on Brian De Palma films, and that the only way he was ever going to direct a movie was if he could sell a horror script, since that was all the rage back then. But he wanted to make it more in the style of Hitchcock than just another exploitative slasher movie, and I think he was successful in that way. Next is LA Wars, a low-budget, schlocky action movie. I first heard of this movie from Red Letter Media's Best of the Worst series, and it looked like a so bad it's good movie. You could definitely have some fun with this film with a group of friends while just clowning on the film. I picked this up at a Bull Moose location while visiting Maine a couple years ago. I've kind of developed this rule that I have to buy some sort of boutique label release when shopping at a store that sells those types of releases. And when I was in Maine last year, I actually bought another MVD release that I'll get to. There's a new commentary for this release with one of the directors, and the commentary was moderated by Heath from the YouTube channel Serial at Midnight. I thought that was just so cool to see someone from this space getting to be included on a collector's edition Blu-ray like this. Next up is Lionheart, and this was the first movie I bought from this series. When this got announced, it was around the time I started diving into Van Damme's filmography, so I bought this day one since a lot of Van Damme movies just had some standard Blu-rays with no real bonus features. One thing I want to note about this release is that on the slipcover, it has a faux sticker for West Coast Video. I had a West Coast Video in my town back in Massachusetts. We went there a lot when it was open, and my brother's friend wound up working there, which meant no late fees. And I got so many of their previously viewed DVDs at a really discounted price. Shout out to Melissa, and rest in peace West Coast Video. As for this movie, it's another fun martial arts tournament style movie just like Bloodsport. It actually feels more like a Street Fighter movie than the actual Street Fighter movie that Van Damme would go on to star in. Next up is Mortuary. It was another blind buy for me, and I bought it solely because of the artwork, and well, because Bill Paxton was in it. I had to rewatch this movie for this video because I could barely remember what happened in the film, but it is a fun horror thriller. I won't spoil who the killer is, but it's pretty obvious despite the red herrings the movie throws at you. Paxton is great in the movie, and this was an early role for him, and he would go on to have a hell of a career. It was unfortunate we lost him at a relatively young age. There wasn't a lot of special features done for this movie, but I would still recommend to at least check this movie out. It's currently streaming on Prime. Next is Nemesis, and I unfortunately missed out on the slipcover for this movie. MVD does a great job with their slipcovers, as you've seen. They're only available with the first pressing, so you kinda gotta jump on these movies early on. Nemesis was another hidden gem for me. It was directed by Albert Pune, who mainly directed low-budget genre films. This is definitely one of the better films of his. He really did a lot with the little money he had to work with. There's some great action sequences in the movie that would rival, if not even surpass, what studios were doing at that time. Tim Thomerson is great in the movie, and Tom Matthews from Friday the 13th Part 6 has a small role, but it was nice to see him pop up in this movie. The Blu-ray also has a great interview with the director Albert Pune. I would highly recommend any action fan to check this movie out. Next is the 3 sequels to Nemesis. Albert Pune returned to direct all 3 of these movies. I bought this because I enjoyed the first movie so much, but these are definitely a step down. And it's even more obvious that Albert was working with even far less money this time around. The lead in these movies changes to a jacked up bodybuilder. It's very obvious that this was her first time acting, but she did pretty well in some of the action sequences. The second one was okay, but the third one was pretty hard to get through, and I still haven't seen the 4th movie. Maybe someday I'll attempt to sit through it, but after the 3rd one, my enthusiasm for the series has fucking plummeted. Next is Split Second, a sci-fi, action, film noir, horror movie. This was another hidden gem, and it stars Rutger Hauer as a cop who's hunting down a killer that rips people's hearts out who may or may not be human. I mean, spoiler alert, the killer is definitely not human. The creature looks like a cross between Venom and Judge Death from the Judge Dredd comics. It's hidden for most of the movie until the 3rd act, but the movie is still engaging till you get to that final confrontation. The creature was designed by Stephen Norrington, who would later go on to direct the first Blade movie, only to quit directing after making Lead of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Tony Malin directed the movie, who also directed The Burning, a classic 80s slasher. I recommend anyone checking this movie out because it's just a cool genre mashup, and despite its relatively low budget, it's still a pretty great movie. Next is a comic book movie with Wes Craven's Swamp Thing. Yes, the Master of Horror made a movie based on a DC Comics character. It's an okay movie with Ray Wise of Twin Peaks and RoboCop fame playing Alec Holland, a scientist that after an accident turns into a heroic plant man. Swamp Thing looks somewhat comic book accurate, but the suit still looks pretty cheap. Adrienne Barbeau also stars, and in the interview on this Blu-ray, she was persuaded to do the film because her then husband John Carpenter was a fan of Craven's work. She also mentions that Craven's budget continued to get slashed throughout the making of the film, and it certainly shows. Especially when it comes to the final fight between Swamp Thing and Arcane. Arcane's mutant monster look is laughably bad, and there's no way anyone was satisfied with how the ending turned out. The movie was previously put out by Scream Factory, but I saw this on the shelf at a Bull Moose last year visiting my friend Jeff in Maine, and MVD put out the R-rated version of the film. That includes a short scene that has some nudity in it, but they also ported over all the previously done bonus features. Next is the sequel, Return of Swamp Thing. Craven didn't come back to direct, but the producers got Jim Wynorski to direct this. The same director of Chopping Mall, one of my favorite movies. He's made over 100 B movies and is still actually working today. Both of these Swamp Thing movies were produced by Benjamin Melnicker and Michael E. Uslan, who would go on to produce the Michael Keaton Batman movie. Michael E. Uslan still gets producer credit to this day on anything remotely Batman related. I enjoyed this movie more than the first film this time around. First off, the Swamp Thing looks way better in this movie. Wynorski said in the interview on this Blu-ray that he wanted to improve the look of the suit, and he was definitely successful in that. He also made this very much a superhero movie. The score has a very heroic ring to it, and Swamp Thing himself acts more heroic than just being the tragic hero he was in the first movie. But still, if you're going to watch anything Swamp Thing related, I would highly suggest you check out the TV show from a few years ago, and it's super unfortunate that it was cancelled. The last movie in this video is Vampire's Kiss, and even if you haven't seen nor heard of this movie, chances are you've at least seen a GIF or a meme of Nick Cage from this movie. Most people will put this in the so bad it's good category, but I also think this movie was intentionally made to be this comedic. I don't think they expected the film to be mocked or laughed at, but there's no fucking way they thought any of this could remotely be taken serious, and that it was meant to be at least melodramatic. This is one of Nick Cage's most memorable performances. Him saying the alphabet or him yelling "I'm a vampire" while running down the streets of New York City stand out for me. His performance is worth checking out for sure. The lone featurette is an old audio commentary with Nick Cage and the director. I'm not a big commentary person, but this may be worth checking out someday. Thanks for watching this video on the MVD Rewind Collection. I need to shout out Eric Wilkinson, who's in charge of this line. And I've seen him go live on Facebook a few times and talk about these releases, and he's always very transparent when most of these labels just aren't. Plus, each of these releases comes with a collectible mini poster, which I forgot to mention. I hope some of you check out these movies and let me know in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, have a movie time. I'm a vampire! I'm a vampire! I'm a vampire!